Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Ezekiel Thornburg, but most folks just call me Zeke. I've been a ranger in these Kentucky mountains for 22 years now, ever since I started as a fire lookout back in 1932. Seen these woods through the Depression, through the war, through good times and lean. Lost my boy Tommy somewhere in the Pacific, never did find out exactly where. But that's neither here nor there. Point is, I know these mountains, know every trail, every creek, every hollow where the old-timers used to live before they moved on or passed away. And I always figured the stories about wild children were just folks making excuses for bad parenting or trying to spook city people who came hunting. But that was before April of 1954, before I found those bones in Ramp Hollow. The Daniel Boone National Forest is full of places that time forgot, deep ravines where the sun barely touches ground, thick with rhododendron and mountain laurel. Ramp Hollow is one of those places. It's where the wild leeks grow thick as hair on a dog's back, and come April, folks from 3 counties over make the hike down there to harvest them. Ramps are strong-tasting things, like onions and garlic had a mean-spirited cousin, but mountain people prize them something fierce after a long winter of canned goods. I was making my rounds that Tuesday morning when I heard the dogs. Not barking like they'd treed something, but howling like they were scared or hurt. Found them at the edge of Ramp Hollow, 3 blue-tick hounds that belonged to Cal Whitman from over in Pine Ridge. Good hunting dogs, not the kind to spook easy. But there they were, hackles up, whining and carrying on like they'd seen the devil himself. Cal was nowhere to be found. The hollow stretched out below me, maybe 200 yards across and twice that long, with steep sides covered in that thick mountain growth. A creek ran down the middle, clear as glass and cold as January. Perfect place for ramps, and Cal knew it better than most. He'd been coming here for 30 years, same as his daddy before him. But the dogs wouldn't go down, not even when I called them. They just sat at the rim, looking down into that hollow like something was waiting for them in the green shadows below. I should have paid more attention to those dogs. The path down was narrow and slick from morning dew. Took me near 10 minutes to reach the bottom, following the old trail that generations of ramp hunters had worn into the hillside. The air down there was different somehow, thicker, cooler than it should have been for April. And quiet, too quiet. No bird song, no squirrels chattering, no buzz of insects. Just the soft gurgle of the creek and my boots on wet leaves. Found Cal's truck parked where the old logging road ended. Driver's door hanging open, keys still in the ignition. His ramp basket was on the seat, empty. A thermos of coffee sat on the dashboard, still warm to the touch. Whatever happened to Cal, it happened recent. I called his name. Sound seemed to get swallowed up by the hollow, like the trees and rocks were drinking it in. Called again, louder. Nothing but my own echo coming back, flat and strange. That's when I started noticing the other things. Little things that didn't sit right. The ramp patches looked wrong. Not harvested clean like you'd expect from an experienced picker, but torn up. Roots pulled out in clumps, leaves scattered around like something had been digging. Or fighting. And the mud near the creek was all churned up, but I couldn't make out clear tracks. Just impressions that might have been feet, if feet came in sizes too small for a grown man and too big for any child I knew of. Found Cal's hat hanging on a tree branch about shoulder high. No wind down there to speak of, so it hadn't blown there. Someone or something had put it there on purpose. And that's when I saw the first bones. They were arranged in a circle around the base of a big oak tree, white and clean as if they'd been picked over by carrion birds. But these bones were old, real old. Some looked like they might have come from deer or hogs, but others looked different. Longer. Shaped wrong for any animal I knew. The old stories came back to me then, the ones I'd heard growing up, but never paid much mind to. About the Spanish flu that hit these mountains in 1918, killed whole families in some of the back hollows. About children found wandering the woods weeks later, wild-eyed and unable to speak. About sounds in the night that weren't quite human and weren't quite animal either. Just mountain talk, I'd always told myself. Folks need something to blame when bad things happen. But standing there in that quiet hollow, looking at those arranged bones with Cal's warm coffee still steaming on his dashboard, I wasn't so sure anymore. Something moved in the trees across the creek, just a flash of pale skin between the green leaves. There and gone so quick I might have imagined it. But the dogs up on the rim started howling again, long and mournful, like they were singing for the dead. I pulled my .38 from its holster and started across the creek, water soaking through my boots. Whatever happened to Cal Whitman, I was going to find out, even if I didn't much like what I might find. The water was ankle deep and cold enough to make my teeth ache. I kept my eyes on the spot where I'd seen that flash of movement, but the rhododendron grew thick as a wall on the far bank. A man could hide an army in there if he had a mind to, or something else could. I was halfway across when I heard the sound, soft at first, like wind through leaves. But then I realized what it was. Singing. A child's voice, high and sweet, singing something I almost recognized. An old hymn maybe, or a lullaby. But the words were wrong somehow, twisted around, until they didn't mean what they used to mean. "Cal," I called out. "Cal Whitman, you in there?" The singing stopped. Then I heard something else. A clicking sound, like someone making noise with their tongue against their teeth. Click, click, pause. Click, 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 like a code or a language I didn't understand. More clicking answered from somewhere to my left. Then from my right. They were talking to each other, whatever they were, and I was standing in the middle of their conversation like a fool with his britches down. I reached the far bank and pushed through the rhododendron thicket, thorns catching at my jacket. The singing started up again, but different this time. Multiple voices, weaving in and out of each other like some kind of harmony. Still that same twisted hymn, still wrong in ways I couldn't put my finger on. Found a narrow deer trail leading deeper into the woods and followed it, gun ready. The trail was well used, but the tracks in the soft earth weren't from deer. They were human footprints, but small, child-sized. Dozens of them, maybe more, pressed into the mud like a whole school class had come walking through. But these weren't normal children's tracks. They were too narrow, toes spread too wide, like feet that had never worn shoes. And some of the prints showed claw marks where nails should have been. The trail led to a clearing maybe 30 feet across, ringed by old-growth trees that must have been standing when Daniel Boone himself walked these ridges. In the center was a circle of stones, blackened by old fires. Animal bones were scattered around like leftovers from a picnic, but picked cleaner than any human teeth could manage. And arranged in the middle of it all was Cal's gear. His ramp knife, his work gloves, his canvas jacket, all folded neat as you please, like someone had taken care with them. But no Cal. The clicking started up again, coming from the trees around the clearing. I turned in a slow circle, trying to spot movement in the shadows, but it was like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. They were there. I could feel eyes on me, but they stayed hidden. "I know you're there," I called out. "I'm a federal ranger, and I'm looking for Cal Whitman. He's a friend of mine, and I'm not leaving without him." Silence. Then, from somewhere above my head, a voice spoke. "Cal, man, good, meet." The words were slurred, like someone learning to talk for the first time. Or someone who'd forgotten how. I looked up and saw a pale face peering down at me through the leaves. There for just a second, before disappearing. A child's face, but wrong. Eyes too big, mouth too wide, teeth filed to points like an animal's. "Where is he?" I demanded. "What did you do with Cal?" Laughter answered me. High-pitched giggles from all around the clearing, like a schoolyard full of children sharing some secret joke. But there was nothing innocent about that sound. It made my skin crawl and my trigger finger itch. One of them dropped from a tree branch not 10 feet away. A boy, maybe 12 years old, but thin as a rail and covered in mud and leaves. His hair hung long and matted, and when he smiled at me, I saw those filed teeth gleaming white as bone. "Ranger. Man. Come. Play," he said in that same broken way of talking. Then he tilted his head and made that clicking sound, and I heard it answered from a dozen places around the clearing. They were surrounding me. More of them appeared, dropping from branches or stepping out from behind trees like ghosts materializing in daylight. Children, all of them, ranging in age from maybe 8 to 16. But they moved wrong, crouched low like animals, fingers splayed against the ground. And their eyes, Lord help me, Their eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and cold as death itself. "Where's Cal?" I asked again, trying to keep my voice steady. The first boy giggled and pointed toward the far edge of the clearing. There was something there, half hidden under a pile of leaves and branches. Something the size and shape of a man. I started toward it, and they let me, following along like a pack of curious dogs. But I could feel the menace coming off them in waves. That barely contained wildness that meant violence was just a heartbeat away. What was left of Cal Whitman wasn't much to look at. They'd stripped the meat from his bones neat as you please, leaving him arranged like one of those medical skeletons you see in doctors' offices. His skull grinned up at me from the leaf pile, and I could see the teeth marks scored into the bone. Human teeth marks. I raised my gun, but they were already moving, fast as snakes, scattering into the underbrush before I could draw a bead on any of them. The boy who'd spoken to me was the last to go, backing away with that horrible smile still plastered across his face. "Ranger. Man. Stay. And play," he said. "We. Hungry. Again. Soon." Then he was gone, melted back into the forest like he'd never been there at all. But I could still hear them moving around me, still hear that soft clicking as they talked to each other in their twisted language. I backed toward the trail, gun sweeping back and forth, but I might as well have been shooting at shadows. They were there. I knew they were there, but they stayed just out of sight, playing with me, letting me know I was outnumbered and outmatched in their territory. Made it back to the creek without them showing themselves again, but I could feel eyes on me every step of the way. Watching, waiting, planning. When I reached the water, I turned for one last look at the hollow. That's when I saw them all, standing at the edge of the clearing like a pack of wolves saying goodbye to a departing stranger. Must have been 20 of them, maybe more. Children who weren't children anymore, who'd forgotten what it meant to be human. The boy who'd spoken raised one pale hand and waved at me, still smiling with those filed teeth. And I realized, with a chill that went straight to my bones, that they were letting me go on purpose. They wanted me to leave. They wanted me to tell someone what I'd seen, because they were getting ready to hunt again. I made it back to the ranger station by noon, hands still shaking from what I'd seen. Should have called the state police right then, should have reported Cal's death, and let someone else deal with whatever those things were down in Ramp Hollow. But who was going to believe a story about wild children eating folks in the Kentucky mountains? They'd think I'd gone soft in the head, been in the woods too long. So instead I called Doc Morrison, the only medical man within 50 miles who'd dealt with mountain folks long enough to know when something wasn't right. Found him at his clinic in Pine Ridge, stitching up a logger who'd had an argument with a chainsaw. "Doc," I said, "I need to ask you about something that happened back in 1918, the Spanish flu outbreak." His hand stilled on the needle. "That's ancient history, Zeke. Why are you asking about that old sadness? Just found something down in Ramp Hollow that doesn't make sense. Cal Whitman's dead, and..." I paused, not sure how to explain what I'd seen. "And it wasn't natural causes." Doc finished his stitching and sent the logger on his way, with a bottle of pills and strict orders to keep the wound clean. When we were alone, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey from the bottle he kept in his desk drawer for cases like this. "Spanish flu hit these mountains like the hand of God," he said, settling into his chair with a wheeze. "Killed whole families in some of the back hollows. Worst was the Morrison clan, no relation to me, mind you, had a settlement way up in Dead Man's Creek. 27 souls, including 11 children. Flu took them all inside of a week." He sipped his whiskey and stared out the window at the mountains. "Funny thing was, when folks went to bury them a month later, some of the children were missing. Bodies just gone, like they'd walked away on their own. People figured animals had dragged them off, but what? But the bodies that were left hadn't been touched by any animal I ever heard of. Picked clean, sure, but not by bears or wildcats. Something with different teeth altogether." I felt that chill again, thinking of those filed points gleaming in the boy's mouth. What happened to the missing children? Stories started up that fall. Hunters seeing small figures in the woods, moving on all fours like animals. Campers hearing singing in languages that weren't quite human. Dogs refusing to enter certain parts of the forest. He finished his whiskey in one swallow. Most folks figured it was just grief and fear playing tricks on their minds. But some of the old-timers, the ones who knew the Cherokee legends about shapeshifters and spirits of the hungry dead, they said the flu had changed those children. Made them into something that wasn't quite alive and wasn't quite dead either. And you believe that? Doc Morrison looked at me with eyes that had seen too much suffering to dismiss anything outright. I believe there are things in these mountains that medicine can't explain. Things that were here before the white man came and will be here long after we're gone. Question is, what exactly did you see down there? I told him. All of it. The bones, the singing, the boy with his filed teeth and pale eyes. Cal's remains picked clean and arranged like a museum display. When I finished, Doc was quiet for a long time. How many of them did you see? He finally asked. 20, maybe more. All children, or at least they looked like children. But some of them, Doc, some of them looked like they'd been living wild for decades. If what you saw really were the Morrison children, they'd be in their 40s now. But if they stopped aging when the flu changed them. He shook his head. We're talking about something that shouldn't exist. Something that feeds on human flesh and breeds more of its kind. That's when the phone rang. Doc answered it, and I watched his face go pale as he listened to whoever was on the other end. That was Sheriff Brady, he said when he hung up. 3 more folks have gone missing since yesterday. The Patterson family from Elkhorn Ridge went out to harvest ramps and never came home. My blood turned to ice water. Where were they headed? Ramp Hollow. We took Doc's truck and drove as far as the old logging road would let us, then hiked the rest of the way on foot. The sun was getting low by the time we reached the rim of the hollow, painting the trees in shades of red and gold that reminded me too much of blood. The Patterson truck was parked next to Cal's, doors hanging open like the family had left in a hurry. But there was no sign of Jim Patterson, his wife Mary, or their 2 teenage boys. Stay close, I told Doc as we made our way down the narrow trail, and keep that shotgun ready. The hollow felt different than it had that morning. Expectant, like the whole place was holding its breath. The air was thick with the smell of decaying leaves and something else underneath it. Something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. We found the Patterson family at the stone circle, or what was left of them. They'd been arranged the same way Cal had been, bones picked clean and laid out with the same careful precision. But this time there were other things mixed in with the human remains. Animal bones, dozens of them, all showing the same teeth marks. Squirrels, possums, even what looked like the skeleton of a young deer. Sweet Jesus, Doc whispered, crossing himself. How many of them are there? That's when the singing started. It came from all around us, that same twisted hymn I'd heard before, but louder now. More voices joining in, creating a harmony that raised the hair on my arms and made my teeth ache. And underneath the singing, I could hear that clicking language, faster, now, urgent. They were excited. The first one appeared at the edge of the clearing, a girl this time, maybe 10 years old, with long blonde hair matted with mud and leaves. She was wearing the torn remains of what might have been a white dress, but it was so filthy and stained I couldn't be sure. When she smiled at us, I saw those same filed teeth, gleaming in the fading light. More of them emerged from the forest, surrounding us just like they had before. But there were more of them now. Many more. I counted at least 30 before I lost track, and they kept coming. Children of all ages, some clearly recent additions to their pack, others who looked like they'd been living wild for years. And in the back, moving with the careful gait of something very old and very dangerous, I saw the biggest one yet. A boy who might have been 16 when the change took him, but whose eyes held the accumulated hunger of 36 years. He was the leader, I could tell by the way the others deferred to him, and when he looked at me, I felt like a rabbit staring into the eyes of a wolf. 2 more, come, to, feed, us, he said in that same broken speech. Good. Ranger, man, brings. Friends? Doc raised his shotgun, but there were too many of them, spread out too wide. We might get 2 or 3 before they swarmed us, but that would be the end of it. What do you want? I called out, trying to buy time while I looked for an escape route. The leader tilted his head, considering the question. When he answered, his voice was clearer than the others, like he'd retained more of his original humanity. Want to grow the family. Want to spread the gift. Want make more like us. He gestured to the newest members of his pack, and I realized with horror that some of them were wearing clothes that looked familiar. A flannel shirt I'd seen Jim Patterson wearing at the general store. a pair of jeans that belonged to one of his boys. They weren't just killing people, they were changing them, adding them to their pack. And from the way they were looking at Doc and me, we were next on their list. "Run," I whispered to Doc, not taking my eyes off the pack leader. "When I start shooting, you run back up that trail and don't look back." But Doc Morrison had been delivering babies and patching up mountain folks for 40 years, and he'd learned a thing or two about facing down the impossible. "Not leaving you here, Zeke. We go together or not at all." The pack was closing in now, moving with that same unsettling grace I'd seen before. They communicated without sound, coordinating their movements through some kind of shared understanding that went beyond normal human capability. It was like watching a single organism with 30 different bodies. The leader stepped forward, and I could see the intelligence burning in those pale eyes. This thing had once been a child, probably the Morrison boy Doc had told me about. 16 years old when the Spanish flu took his family and changed him into something else. But the mind trapped inside that ageless body had learned and grown and adapted over the decades. "You know about us now," he said, each word carefully formed. "Cannot let leave. Cannot let the secret spread." "The secret's already out," I lied. "I told the sheriff everything. He's on his way here with a dozen men and hunting dogs." The leader's smile showed those filed teeth. "Sheriff Brady, very fat man, very slow runner. We know him well." My blood turned cold. "If they'd killed the sheriff too, how many people have you taken?" I demanded. "Many, over the years. Some we eat, some we change. Depends on how hungry we are." He gestured to the bones scattered around the clearing, and I realized this wasn't just the Patterson family and Cal. This was the accumulated remains of decades of hunting. Dozens of people who disappeared in these mountains over the years, all attributed to accidents or wild animals or simple misfortune. "The gift is spreading," the leader continued. "Soon, there will be enough of us to leave the hollow, to hunt in the towns below." That's when Doc spoke up, his voice steady despite the fear I could see in his eyes. "You were human once, all of you. There's still something human left inside, or you wouldn't be talking to us, you'd just attack." Some of the younger ones tilted their heads at this, like they were remembering something half forgotten. But the leader's expression hardened. "Human is weak. Human dies. We are beyond death now, beyond pain, beyond and fear, beyond love," Doc said quietly, "beyond family, beyond everything that makes life worth living." For a moment, something flickered in those pale eyes, a shadow of the boy who had died 36 years ago, afraid and alone and watching his family waste away from disease. But then it was gone, replaced by that ancient hunger. "Enough talking," the leader hissed. He made that clicking sound, and the pack moved as one. They came at us from all sides, low and fast, fingers splayed like claws. I got off 3 shots, saw 2 of them go down, but the rest kept coming. Doc's shotgun boomed beside me, and another one tumbled backward into the creek. But there were too many, moving too fast. One of them hit me low, driving me to the ground, and I felt those filed teeth searching for my throat. I rolled, managed to get my boot into its stomach and kick it away, but 2 more took its place. They moved like animals, but with human cunning, trying to pin my arms while their leader approached with that horrible smile. That's when I heard the sound that saved our lives. Barking, deep-throated howling that echoed off the walls of the hollow. Real dogs, coming down the trail fast as they could run. And behind them, voices shouting my name. The pack froze, heads turning toward the sound like deer hearing a hunter's approach. The leader snarled something in that clicking language, and most of them scattered into the forest. But a few of the newer ones, the ones who still remembered what human voices meant, hesitated. "Zeke, Doc, you down there?" Sheriff Brady's voice boomed through the trees, and I'd never been so glad to hear that gravelly tone in my life. The leader looked at me with pure hatred burning in those pale eyes. "This is not over. We know where you live. We know your scent." Then, He was gone, melting into the shadows with the rest of his pack, leaving Doc and me gasping in the clearing, surrounded by scattered bones and the echo of inhuman laughter. Sheriff Brady arrived 5 minutes later with 3 deputies and the best tracking dogs in the county. Took one look at the scene and started cursing in languages I didn't know he spoke. "What in the blue blazes happened here?" he demanded. I looked at Doc, and he nodded slightly. "Time to tell the truth, no matter how crazy it sounded." "Sheriff," I said, "we've got a problem, a big one, and it's been growing in these mountains for 36 years. So I told him everything. The whole impossible story of the Ramp Hollow children and their pack of feral cannibals. Expected him to laugh. Expected him to suggest I take a long vacation somewhere warm and sunny. Instead, he just nodded grimly. "Been wondering when someone would finally run into them," he said. "Had reports for years about missing hikers, strange sounds in the night, livestock killed in ways that didn't make sense. Always figured there was something up here that didn't belong." "You knew?" Doc asked. "Suspected. My granddaddy was one of the men who went to bury the Morrison family back in 18. Told me stories about those missing children that gave me nightmares as a boy. But knowing and proving are 2 different things." He looked around the clearing, taking in the arranged bones and the scattered remains. "Well, now we've got our proof. Question is, what are we going to do about it?" We did what mountain people have always done when faced with something that threatened their own. We hunted them. Took 3 months to clear out Ramp Hollow completely. Brought in specialists from the state, men who knew how to track things that didn't want to be found. The pack had scattered after our encounter, but they couldn't hide forever. Not with hunting dogs that could follow a scent trail through hell and back. We found their main den in a cave system, about a mile from the stone circle. Must have been using it for decades, because the walls were covered with paintings. Human figures arranged in hunting scenes, but twisted and wrong, like children's drawings of adult nightmares. And bones. Lord, the bones. Hundreds of them, stacked neat as cordwood in chambers that stretched back into the mountain. The pack leader was the last one we cornered. Found him alone in a side tunnel, backed up against solid rock, with nowhere left to run. When our lights hit him, he just stood there and smiled with those filed teeth. "You cannot kill us all," he said in that broken voice. "The gift spreads. Others, like us, in other places. Other children who died wrong." Then he lunged at the nearest deputy, and that was the end of it. But his words stayed with me. Other places, other children who died wrong. I retired the following spring. Couldn't stomach the thought of walking those trails anymore. Moved down to Lexington, got a job as a security guard at the university. Figured I'd seen enough of the deep woods to last me a lifetime. But I keep up with the news from the mountains. Read the papers, listen to the reports that come in over the police radio. And sometimes, late at night when the wind's blowing just right, I hear stories that make my blood run cold. Missing hikers in the Smokies. Livestock killings in West Virginia that don't match any known predator. Children singing in languages that aren't quite human, heard by campers in the Cherokee National Forest. The Ramp Hollow pack is gone, buried deep in unmarked graves where nothing will ever grow again. But that thing the leader talked about, that gift that spreads from one to another, I don't think we got it all. Sometimes I wake up in my apartment in the city, surrounded by concrete and steel and electric lights, and I can still hear them, singing their twisted hymns in the darkness, clicking to each other in their secret language. Planning, waiting, growing, because there are other hollows in these mountains, other places where time moves differently and death doesn't always mean the end. Other children who might have died wrong, in ways that changed them into something that should never have been. And on nights when the moon is dark and the wind carries sounds from far away, I wonder if maybe they're still out there. Still hunting, still adding to their pack, still waiting for the next ramp season to come around. My name is Ezekiel Thornburg, and I used to think I knew these mountains, but the mountains know things we never should have learned. And they remember everything. My name is Augustus Thornfield, but most folks just call me Gus. I've been a forest ranger for 19 years now, working the wild country where Tennessee and Virginia shake hands along the Cherokee National Forest. It's beautiful land, but it's got secrets buried deeper than tree roots. I wasn't supposed to be working that August day in 1971. Hell, none of us were. The drought had everything bone dry, and we'd closed the forest to visitors. Fire danger was through the roof. But Dr. Sarah Chen from the university had called 3 times that week about her missing archaeology team. They were studying the old Melungeon settlement, she'd told me over the crackling phone line. 5 graduate students. They haven't checked in for 4 days. I knew the place she meant. Hidden Valley about 8 miles up the Powell River, where it cuts through the mountains. Old-timers called it Cursed Hollow, though the maps just marked it as Survey Point 47. The Melungeons had lived there back in the 1800s before. Well, before things went bad. My grandmother used to tell stories about them. Strange people, she'd say. Mixed blood, part Cherokee, part Portuguese, part God knows what. They kept to themselves mostly, but when the white settlers started pushing them out, the Melungeons didn't go quiet. Story was, the last family to leave put a curse on the land. Blood curse. My grandmother called it. Said it would claim anyone who disturbed their rest. I never put much stock in those old tales. I had an anthropology degree from UT, spent years documenting Appalachian folklore. Academic interest, you understand. The curses and haints and mountain magic, they were just stories people told to make sense of hard times. But something about that valley always felt wrong to me. The hike up there took me 3 hours through heat that felt like walking into an oven. No wind, no bird songs, nothing but the crunch of dead leaves under my boots. Even the creek was dry, just white stones sitting in an empty bed like old bones. The whole forest felt like it was holding its breath. I found their camp around noon. 5 tents arranged in a careful circle, research equipment scattered around a cold fire pit. But something was off. The metal stakes holding down the tents had melted. Not burned, melted. Twisted into impossible shapes like someone had grabbed them with hands hot as forge fire. Their notebooks were there, pages fluttering in the slight breeze. I picked one up and read the last entry, dated 4 days ago. Asterisk. Found, stone foundation, under the oak grove. Petroglyphs match Cherokee symbols for blood debt and eternal watching. Local informant, elderly woman, named Maddie Blackwood, warned us to leave before sunset. Says the old families never really left this place. Ridiculous superstition, of course, but the heat here is strange. Temperature readings don't match what we're feeling. Asterisk. I looked around for more clues. Their water jugs were empty, but not from drinking. The plastic had been drained somehow, like something had sucked every drop right through the walls. Same with their food. Jerky dried to powder, canned goods split open and empty. That's when I noticed the footprints. They started at each tent and led toward the old settlement ruins. 5 sets of boot prints, clear as day in the dust. But alongside them were other marks. Bare feet, human-sized but wrong somehow. The impressions were too deep, like whoever made them weighed twice what they should. And they were still warm. I touched one with my finger and jerked my hand back. The earth was hot enough to raise blisters. Following the trail, I pushed through a stand of dead oaks into what had been the settlement proper. Foundation stones poked up through the weeds like broken teeth. In the center stood one structure still mostly intact, an old cabin with a stone chimney and walls black with age. The student's trail led right to the front door. I called out, "Hello? Doctor. Chen sent me to check on you folks." My voice echoed strangely in the heat, like the mountains were swallowing the words. No answer. But I could have sworn I heard something from inside the cabin. Voices, maybe. Whispers. I approached the door, noting more of those wrong footprints in the dust. The wood was so old it looked petrified, but the metal hinges had melted just like the tent stakes. The door hung open about 6 inches, showing nothing but darkness beyond. That's when I heard it, clear as anything. My own voice calling from inside. "Hello, Doctor. Chen sent me to check on you folks." My exact words, my exact tone. But I was standing outside. Every instinct told me to run. 19 years in these mountains had taught me to trust my gut, but 5 young people were missing, and I had a job to do. I pulled out my flashlight and pushed through the door. The inside of the cabin was wrong. Not just old or abandoned wrong, but fundamentally impossible wrong. The space was bigger than the outside walls could contain, stretching back into shadows my light couldn't touch. And it was cold. In 100-degree heat, the air inside was winter cold. But the worst part was what I found on the floor. 5 sets of clothes, laid out neat as you please. Shirts, pants, boots, everything the missing students had been wearing. Still warm to the touch. Still shaped like they had bodies in them, but empty. And hanging on the far wall, too dark to see clear, but they're all the same, were 5 human-shaped shadows. They moved when my light hit them, turning toward me with a sound like wind through dry leaves. That's when I ran. I made it back to the ranger station by sunset, shaking like a leaf and talking too fast. My supervisor, Bill Hawkins, listened to my story with the patient expression he used for drunk hikers reporting Bigfoot sightings. "Gus, you've been working too hard," he said, pouring coffee from a pot that had been cooking all day. "Heat like this, man starts seeing things." "I'm not seeing things, Bill. Those kids are in trouble. Then we'll organize a proper search tomorrow, get some volunteers, maybe a helicopter." But I couldn't wait until tomorrow. Something about those shadows on the wall, the way they'd moved when they saw me, it felt urgent, like time was running out. I went home to my cabin on Maple Creek, but I couldn't sit still. My grandmother's old books were packed away in the attic, full of stories and warnings I'd always thought were just folklore. Now I dug them out, looking for anything about the Melungeons and their curse. Found it in a journal my great-aunt had kept, dated 1923. Asterisk, the Blackwood family was the last to leave the settlement. When the government men came with papers saying they had to go, old Ezekiel Blackwood stood on his porch and spoke words in a language none of us recognized. Cherokee maybe, or Portuguese, or something older than both. Whatever he said, the very air seemed to listen. Then he cut his palm with a flint knife and let the blood drip on the threshold stone. "Our blood will remember this place," he said. "And this place will remember our blood. Any who disturb our rest will join it, and their blood will feed the curse until Judgment Day." Asterisk. I was still reading when I heard the knock on my door. 3 soft taps, pause, 3 more taps. The way my late wife used to knock when she came home from the night shift at the hospital, but Mary had been dead for 6 years. I looked through the window and saw her standing on my porch, wearing the blue dress she'd been buried in. She looked exactly like I remembered. Brown hair, kind eyes, that small scar on her chin from falling off her bike as a child. Even her smile was the same. "Gus," her voice carried through the door, sweet and familiar. "I've been waiting for you to come home." My hands were shaking as I reached for the doorknob. Part of me, the part that missed her so bad it felt like a physical wound, wanted to open that door more than anything in the world. But I'd seen those empty clothes in the cabin. I'd felt the wrongness in that valley. "You're not Mary," I said through the door. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "Of course I'm Mary. Don't you recognize your own wife?" Mary never called me Gus, she called me Augie. The thing wearing my wife's face tilted its head, considering. "Augie then, please let me in, I'm so cold." I backed away from the door, reaching for the loaded shotgun I kept by the fireplace. "What do you want?" "Just to hold you again." She pressed her face against the window glass. "Just to touch you one more time." Her breath fogged the window, but the fog was red. "Where are the students?" I demanded. "Students?" The Mary thing looked confused for a moment. Then it smiled, and when it did, I could see that its teeth were made of stone. "Oh, you mean my new family. They're waiting for you, Augie. We're all waiting." It raised one hand and pressed it flat against the window. Where its palm touched the glass, the surface began to bubble and melt. Heat radiated through the wall like I was standing next to a furnace. I fired the shotgun through the window. The buckshot passed right through the Mary thing without effect. It looked down at the holes in its chest with mild interest, then back at me. When it opened its mouth, smoke poured out. "You can't hurt what's already dead, Augie, and you can't run from blood debt." I grabbed my truck keys and bolted for the back door. My pickup was parked behind the cabin, and I had it started and moving before the thing could reach me. In the rearview mirror, I saw it standing in my driveway, still wearing Mary's face, but growing taller with each second. By the time I reached the main road, it was 8 feet tall, and its skin looked like tree bark. But it didn't follow me. It just watched me go with eyes like burnt coals. I drove to Bill Hawkins' house, but his wife said he'd gone to check on the search area personally, wouldn't be back until morning. I tried the sheriff's office, but Deputy Morrison listened to my story with obvious skepticism. You're saying something that looked like your dead wife tried to break into your house? I know how it sounds. You've been under a lot of stress, Gus. Maybe you should talk to Doc Matthews, get something to help you sleep. I left Morrison's office knowing I was on my own. Whatever was happening in that valley, whatever had taken those students, it was connected to the Melungeon curse. And if the old stories were true, it wouldn't stop with 5 victims. I spent the night in my truck, outside the all-night diner on Highway 23, drinking coffee and trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Every time a car passed, every time someone walked by in the dark, I wondered if it was really them or just another shadow wearing a stolen face. When dawn finally came, I made my decision. I couldn't wait for help that probably wouldn't come anyway. Those kids were still missing, and if there was any chance they were alive, I had to try to find them. But this time, I was going prepared. I hit the library as soon as it opened, digging through local history records and old newspaper files. What I found made my blood run cold. The Melungeon settlement hadn't been abandoned peacefully. In 1847, a group of white landowners had accused the families of practicing witchcraft. 3 children had died that summer from a fever, and someone started rumors that the Melungeons had cursed the water supply. A mob had surrounded the settlement one night, demanding the families leave immediately. When they refused, the mob set fire to their crops and killed their livestock. But something had gone wrong. The fire had spread faster than anyone expected, trapping several of the attackers. 7 men had burned to death that night. The newspaper account from 1847 was brief. The unfortunate incident at the settlement has been resolved. The remaining families have agreed to relocate voluntarily. Authorities report no further action will be necessary. But a handwritten note in the margin, added years later, told a different story. Ezekiel Blackwood's curse killed them all eventually. Fire took their houses, drought took their crops, fever took their children. Some debts can only be paid in blood. I cross-referenced the names of the 7 dead men with county records. Their descendants still lived in the area. The Chen archaeology team had been staying with one of them, a farmer named Jim Corbin, whose great-grandfather had been part of the mob. I drove out to Corbin's farm around noon, finding him replacing a broken water pump behind his house. He was a big man, about 50, with the weathered hands of someone who'd worked the land his whole life. "You're that ranger, right?" he said when I introduced myself. "The one looking for those college kids?" "That's right. I understand they were staying here." Corbin's expression darkened. "They were, until 4 nights ago, packed up and left without a word. Still owe me 2 days' rent." "Did they say where they were going?" "Nope, just gone in the morning, all their gear too." He gestured toward an empty RV space behind the barn. "Figured they got spooked by something." "Spooked how?" Corbin was quiet for a long moment, working on the pump with more force than necessary. "You ever hear the old stories about that valley up there?" "Some of them. My great-grandfather used to tell me about the night they ran the Melungeons off. Said it was necessary, you understand. Folks were scared, children dying, crops failing. But he also said..." Corbin straightened up, wiping grease from his hands. "He said, when that old man cut his palm and spoke those words, the very air caught fire. And right before they left, Ezekiel Blackwood looked him in the eye and said, 'Your blood will remember this night, and my blood will collect the debt.' You think that's what happened to the students?" "I think some things are better left alone." Corbin picked up his tools and started walking toward the house. "And I think you'd be smart to stay away from that valley." But I couldn't stay away. By 2 o'clock, I was back on the trail, this time carrying everything I thought might help. Salt from my grandmother's protection rituals, a Cherokee blessing stone my grandfather had given me, and enough ammunition to fight a small war. The heat was worse than the day before, if that was possible. The thermometer clipped to my pack read 110 degrees, but it felt hotter. My water was gone before I'd hiked 2 miles, sucked dry by air so thirsty it seemed to pull moisture right through the plastic. When I reached the valley, I found that the abandoned camp had changed. The melted tent stakes were gone, but the tents themselves had been arranged in a perfect circle around a stone altar that hadn't been there before. On the altar lay 5 objects: a university ID card, a class ring, a pocket knife, a silver necklace, and a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. personal items belonging to the missing students. I approached the altar carefully, noting that the ground around it was scorched black in a perfect 10-foot circle. The air above it shimmered with heat, and I could smell something burning, even though I saw no flames. That's when I heard the voices. At first, I thought it was the wind moving through the trees. But there was no wind. The voices were coming from the old cabin, multiple people talking all at once. I recognized some of them: Dr. Chen's clipped academic tone, a young man's nervous laugh, a woman's voice raised in what sounded like an argument. I crept closer to the cabin, noting that the melted door hinges had been repaired somehow. The door stood wide open now, revealing not the impossible darkness I'd seen before, but what looked like a normal room lit by oil lamps. Inside, I could see people moving around. 5 figures, dressed like modern college students, talking and gesturing as if they were having an ordinary conversation. But their movements were wrong, too stiff, like puppets being worked by an unskilled hand. One of them noticed me in the doorway and waved. "Hey, you must be the ranger," Dr. Chen called. Come in, we've been waiting for you." It was a young woman, maybe 25, with short dark hair and a friendly smile. She looked completely normal, except for her eyes, which were solid black from lid to lid. "We've made an amazing discovery," she continued, her voice bright and cheerful. "The Melungeon settlement is perfectly preserved down here. You have to see it." "Down where?" I asked, not moving from the doorway. "In the root cellar, of course. That's where they lived during the persecution. Tunnels and chambers carved right into the bedrock. It's like a whole city down there." Another figure emerged from the shadows, a young man wearing a University of Tennessee t-shirt. His skin had a strange gray tint, and when he smiled, I could see that his gums were black. "The preservation is incredible," he said. "Bodies that have been dead for over a century, but they look like they just laid down to sleep. And the petroglyphs. Dr. Chen thinks they might rewrite our understanding of pre-Columbian contact." "Where is Dr. Chen?" I asked. "Right here." The doctor herself appeared in the doorway, looking exactly as I remembered her from our phone conversations. Mid-40s, graying hair pulled back in a professional bun, wire-rimmed glasses. Except her clothes were the same blue dress I'd seen on the Mary thing the night before. "We've been waiting for you, Ranger Thornfield. The Blackwood family is very eager to meet you." She stepped aside, and I could see deeper into the cabin. What had appeared to be one room was actually a tunnel mouth carved into the living rock. Oil lamps lined the walls, casting, dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of the flames. And walking up from the depths came more figures. Men and women dressed in period clothing from the 1800s, but their faces were wrong. Some had no eyes, just smooth skin where the sockets should be. Others had too many eyes, or eyes like burning coals, or eyes that reflected light like an animal's. The one leading them wore the remnants of what had once been a fine black coat, now moth-eaten and stained. His face was human enough, but his skin looked like tree bark and his fingers ended in claws of yellowed bone. "Welcome, Ranger Thornfield," he said, in a voice like wind through dry leaves. "I am Ezekiel Blackwood. We have been expecting you for a very long time." I turned to run, but found my path blocked. Standing behind me were 7 more figures. The men who had died in the fire, their flesh charred and smoking, their eyes like burning coals. "The blood debt must be paid," Ezekiel continued. "Your ancestor was among those who drove us from our home. His blood runs in your veins, and through you the debt will be satisfied." "I don't have any ancestors from here," I said, backing toward the altar. "My family came from Scotland." Ezekiel smiled, revealing teeth of blackened stone. "Your great-great-grandfather was Thomas McReynolds. He sold the land to the government men who came with papers. His signature is on the deed that stole our home." He was right. I'd seen the name in genealogy records, but I'd never connected it to this place. "Thomas McReynolds took our gold in payment for his betrayal," Ezekiel said. "Gold we had saved for 3 generations. Gold we needed to start over in a new place. Without it, we had nothing. We starved, we died. Our children died." The charred figures behind me began to move closer, reaching out with hands that still smoldered. But death was not the end for us. The curse preserved us, kept us waiting, kept us watching. "Every generation of McReynolds' blood we have claimed. Your grandfather died young. Your father died young. And now it is your turn." I fumbled for the Cherokee blessing stone, holding it up between us. This land belonged to the Cherokee first. Your curse has no power over their protection. Ezekiel's expression changed, surprise flickering across his inhuman features. The approaching figures stopped, suddenly uncertain. The Cherokee and the Melungeons were allies. I continued, remembering my grandmother's stories. Your people had Cherokee blood too. You can't claim what belongs to the Cherokee nation. For a moment, the heat lessened. The shadows seemed to draw back. Then Ezekiel laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Clever, Ranger Thornfield. Your grandmother taught you well, but you forget, Cherokee law demands blood for blood as surely as any curse. He gestured to the 5 student things standing in the cabin doorway. These young people came here to disturb our rest, to catalog our bones like museum pieces. Cherokee law gives us the right to defend our dead. The blessing stone in my hand began to grow warm, then hot. I dropped it, and it shattered when it hit the ground. Your protection is broken, Ezekiel said, and your debt remains. The charred figures closed in from behind, while the student things approached from the cabin. I was trapped between them with nowhere to run, but as they got closer, I noticed something that gave me a desperate idea. None of them cast shadows. In the blazing afternoon sun, surrounded by creatures that radiated heat like forge fires, not one of them threw a shadow on the ground. And I remembered something else from my grandmother's stories. Shadows were how you could tell the living from the dead. But the shadows I'd seen on the cabin wall the day before had been moving. Which meant, the students are still alive, I said, backing toward the stone altar. You're just wearing their faces. Ezekiel's expression darkened. Their bodies live, but their souls belong to us now. Then I want to make a deal. The approaching figures stopped. In the supernatural world my grandmother had taught me about, deals were binding things. Even cursed spirits had to honor them. What deal? Ezekiel asked. A trade, me for them. 1 life in its proper time, for 5 lives taken early. Let the students go, and I'll stay willingly. Ezekiel considered this, his bark-like skin creaking as he tilted his head. Why would you sacrifice yourself for strangers? Because it's my job to protect people in these mountains. And because the blood debt is mine to pay, not theirs. Acceptable, Ezekiel said after a long moment. But the trade must be sealed in blood. He produced an ancient flint knife, its edge still sharp despite its age. Cut your palm as I did 124 years ago. Let your blood touch the threshold stone, and the students will be freed. I took the knife, feeling its weight. The handle was worn smooth by generations of hands, and I could sense the power in it, not evil, exactly, but old and hungry. But first, I said, I want to see them, the real students. Not these puppets. Ezekiel gestured toward the cabin. The student things stepped aside, revealing the tunnel mouth carved into the rock. Follow me. We descended into darkness, lit by oil lamps that had been burning for over a century. The tunnel walls were covered with petroglyphs, not Cherokee symbols as I'd expected, but something older, something that hurt to look at directly. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber carved from living rock. And there, arranged around the walls like sleeping children, were dozens of bodies. Some wore clothes from the 1800s, the original Melungeon families who had died after being driven from their home. Others were more recent, hikers and hunters who had wandered into the valley over the decades, all perfectly preserved by the unnatural cold of the chamber. And in the center, lying on stone slabs like sacrificial altars, were the 5 missing students. They breathed, but their eyes were closed and their skin was pale as marble. Wisps of shadow moved above their bodies like smoke, and I realized these were their souls, trapped between life and death. The curse feeds on life force, Ezekiel explained. It has kept us aware through the long years, waiting for justice. When the debt is paid, we will finally rest. I looked at the students, so young and full of promise. Then I looked at the dozens of other victims, people who had died for nothing more than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. How do I know you'll honor the deal? I asked. Because blood magic is binding. Once the trade is made, we cannot break it. I raised the flint knife, placing the edge against my palm. But as I prepared to cut, I heard a voice from the tunnel entrance. Don't do it, Augie. I turned to see my wife Mary standing in the lamplight, not the twisted thing that had visited me the night before, but the real Mary. her spirit, somehow drawn to this place of death and sorrow. "Mary," I whispered. "The deal he's offering isn't what you think," she said, moving closer. "Look around you. Look at all the people who made the same trade over the years." I looked again at the preserved bodies and realized the truth. They weren't just victims of the curse. They were people who had tried to save others by offering themselves instead. People who had made the same deal I was about to make. "The curse doesn't want to rest," Mary continued. "It wants to feed. Your death won't free the students. It will just give it power to claim more victims." Ezekiel hissed, his human mask slipping away to reveal something ancient and hungry. "Silence, spirit. You have no power here." But Mary smiled sadly. "I have the power of love, Ezekiel, and love is stronger than any curse." She reached out to touch my face, and I felt warmth flow through me. Not the killing heat of the curse, but the gentle warmth of genuine affection. And in that warmth, I found clarity. "There is another way," I said, backing toward the tunnel entrance. "Cherokee law allows for a champion's trial. Trial by combat." Ezekiel's eyes narrowed. "You would fight me? I would fight you. Winner takes all, the students, the curse, everything." "Foolish. I am already dead. You cannot kill what has no life." "Maybe not," I said, pulling out the silver cross my grandmother had given me. "But I can send you to whatever judgment you've been avoiding for over a century." Ezekiel roared, his form expanding until he filled half the chamber. His skin became true bark, his fingers grew into root-like claws, and his eyes blazed like coals. "You think your Christian trinkets can harm me? This isn't a Christian symbol," I said, holding up the cross. "It's Cherokee, the four directions, the balance of all things, and you've been out of balance for too long." I pressed the cross against his chest. Light erupted from the point of contact, not the golden light of heaven but the clean white light of justice. Ezekiel screamed as his form began to dissolve, the bark skin cracking and flaking away. "The debt," he gasped. "The debt is paid," I said firmly. "Paid by a century of suffering, paid by dozens of innocent lives. Justice demands an end." The light spread through the chamber, touching each preserved body. One by one, they crumbled to dust. Not from decay, but from release. Their spirits, finally freed, rose like glowing mist toward the ceiling and passed through the rock into whatever waited beyond. The 5 students gasped, their eyes opening as their souls snapped back into their bodies. The unnatural cold left the chamber, replaced by the natural coolness of deep earth. And Ezekiel Blackwood, the last of the Melungeon curse, dissolved into shadow and was gone. The hike back to civilization took 6 hours. The students were weak but alive, confused about where they'd been but grateful to be free. I radioed for medical evacuation once we reached the ranger station, and by midnight they were all safe in the county hospital. Dr. Chen recovered fastest, her academic mind already trying to process what had happened. "The chamber you described," she said when I visited her the next day. "Did you take any photographs?" I shook my head. Camera wouldn't work down there. Too much interference. It was true, though not the whole truth. When we'd climbed back to the surface, I'd found that the tunnel entrance had sealed itself. Where the cabin had stood for over a century, there was now just an empty stone foundation and a pile of very old, very weathered boards. Some things, I'd decided, were better left undocumented. The official report listed the students' disappearance as temporary disorientation due to extreme heat exposure. The melted tent stakes and other strange evidence were attributed to unusual geological thermal activity. Everyone seemed satisfied with these minus explanations, and I didn't offer any alternatives. But I kept thinking about what Mary had told me in that underground chamber. About love being stronger than any curse. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from Maddie Blackwood, the elderly woman who had warned the students to leave the valley. She was Ezekiel's great-great-granddaughter, the last living descendant of the original Melungeon families. Asterisk, Ranger Thornfield. Asterisk, the letter read. Asterisk, I felt my ancestor's spirit pass into rest 2 weeks ago. Whatever you did up there, you freed him from the anger that had kept him bound to this world. The curse is broken, the debt is paid. Thank you for giving my family peace. Asterisk. She enclosed an old photograph, a daguerreotype from the 1840 showing a group of families standing in front of the settlement cabins. In the center stood a young man with kind eyes and work-hardened hands. He looked nothing like the monster I'd fought underground, but everything like someone who might have been a good neighbor if given the chance. Ezekiel Blackwood before the hatred consumed him. I framed the photograph and hung it in my office, along with a small placard that read, "In memory of the Melungeon families, may they find the peace that was denied them in life." The valley itself changed after that summer. The creek started flowing again, fed by springs that had been dry for decades. Trees that had been dying in the drought put out new growth. Wildlife returned. Deer, birds, even a black bear with cubs that I spotted during my monthly patrols. But I still feel watched sometimes when I hike through there. Not by anything malevolent, just aware. Like the land itself is keeping an eye on things, making sure the balance is maintained. And sometimes, on particularly quiet evenings when the light slants through the trees just right, I catch a glimpse of figures moving through the forest. The Melungeon families, I think, finally able to rest in the place they'd loved so much. Finally able to be at peace. The archaeology team published their research the following spring, a comprehensive study of Melungeon culture and settlement patterns that became a standard reference in the field. Dr. Chen dedicated the work to those who came before and to the ranger who made sure their story was told with respect. I kept my job another 15 years, until arthritis in my knees made the mountain trails too difficult, retired to a cabin on Maple Creek, not far from where I'd grown up. I spend my days now reading and writing, documenting the stories my grandmother told me before they're lost forever. Because I learned something important in that cursed valley. Stories have power. They can trap us in cycles of anger and revenge, or they can set us free to find peace. The choice is always ours. And every August, on the anniversary of that day, I hike back to the valley with a bouquet of wildflowers. I leave them on the old foundation stones where the Blackwood cabin once stood, and I say a prayer for all the souls who found their rest there. The mountains remember everything, but sometimes, with enough love and respect, they can learn to forgive. My name is Jeremiah Whitlock, but folks around here just call me Jerry. I've been a ranger in these West Virginia mountains for 16 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything the Appalachians could throw at a man. Black bears, lost hikers, flash floods, cave-ins, you name it, I've dealt with it. That was before I met what lives in Devil's Backbone. I grew up in these hollers. My daddy worked the coal mines until his lungs gave out, and his daddy before him did the same. I swore I'd never go underground like that, but life has a funny way of making liars out of us all. The difference is, I go into caves to save people, not to dig coal. Been doing cave rescue for 12 years now, pulled 47 people out of tight spots. I know these mountains like the back of my hand. Every trail, every cave, every dangerous drop-off. Devil's Backbone is a ridge trail that runs along a knife edge of rock with 300-foot drops on both sides. The Cherokee used to call it Where Spirits Walk, but I never put much stock in old mountain tales. Growing up, my grandmother would tell stories about hollow folk, pale things that lived deep in the caves and came up to steal children. Just stories to keep kids from wandering off, I figured. October 23rd, 1964. Changed all that. I was sitting in the ranger station that morning, working on my weekly reports, when the call came in. 3 experienced cavers hadn't returned from a trip to explore some new caves they'd found beneath Devil's Backbone. These weren't tourists who'd gotten lost on a day hike. Bill Henderson, Rick Morris, and Dave Carpenter were serious cavers who knew what they were doing. They'd been mapping cave systems in West Virginia for 5 years and never missed a check-in. The weather was turning. October in these mountains means thick fog rolling through the valleys like milk, and the first frost had already hit. Perfect conditions for someone to get hurt or disoriented. But these boys knew better than to take chances in weather like this. I grabbed my gear, headlamp, backup lights, 200 feet of rope, first aid kit, and my radio. The truck ride to Devil's Backbone took 45 minutes on winding mountain roads. The whole time, I kept thinking this would be simple. Maybe they'd found something interesting and lost track of time. Maybe someone had taken a small fall, and they were waiting for help. Happens all the time. When I got to their camp, everything looked normal at first. 3 tents set up properly, camp stove, supplies organized the way experienced outdoors people do things. Their truck was there, keys hanging from the ignition like always. But something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Then I noticed the quiet. These mountains are never truly quiet. You've got birds, wind in the trees, insects, small animals moving around. But standing there in their camp, I realized I couldn't hear anything. Not even wind. The silence pressed against my ears like I was underwater. I found the cave entrance about 100 yards up the trail. The boys had marked it with orange flagging tape and left a note in a waterproof bag. New system, looks extensive, back by 6 p.m. The note was dated the day before. They were already 12 hours overdue. I called into the cave, my voice echoing back, strange and hollow. No answer. I tried my radio to call for backup, but the signal was dead. Not unusual in these mountains. The rock formations can block radio waves. I'd have to hike back to higher ground to get a signal out. But something told me there wasn't time for that. I checked my gear one more time, clicked on my headlamp, and headed into the cave. The entrance was a tight squeeze that opened up into a larger chamber after about 10 feet. My light beam swept across the walls, and I could see the boys had been here. Fresh scratches on the rocks where they'd anchored their ropes. A few pieces of flagging tape marking their route. The cave was cold, not cool like caves usually are, but cold like a freezer. My breath came out in puffs, and I zipped up my jacket. After 16 years of cave rescue, I knew normal cave temperature. This wasn't normal. I followed their rope down a steep slope into a larger chamber. The walls were smooth limestone, carved by water over thousands of years. Beautiful formations, flowstone, columns, delicate crystals that caught my light and threw it back in sparkles. But still that unnatural quiet, and still that bone-deep cold. 50 feet down, I found their first anchor point. The rope was tied off properly, but when I examined it closer, my blood went cold. The rope had been cut, not frayed from rubbing against rock, not worn through by weather. Cut clean through with something sharp. I played my light around the chamber, looking for any sign of the boys. That's when I saw the scratches on the wall, fresh marks in the limestone, about 7 feet up. They looked like claw marks, but too big for any animal I knew. And too deliberate. They formed letters, G-O-B-A-C-K. Someone, or something, had carved "Go back" into the wall in perfect English. That's when I stopped thinking this was a normal rescue operation. I stared at those scratches for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The marks were fresh, stone dust still scattered on the cave floor beneath them, but no tool I knew could cut limestone that cleanly. And the height, whoever made them would have to be at least 8 feet tall. I keyed my radio again, hoping to catch a signal bounce off the cave walls. Nothing but static. I was on my own until I could get back to the surface. Following the boys' route deeper into the cave, I found their second anchor point another 60 feet down. Here the passage split into 3 different tunnels. They'd taken the middle one, leaving flagging tape to mark their path. Smart cave procedure. Always mark your route in case your lights fail. But as I entered the middle passage, my headlamp began to dim. Fresh batteries that morning, and now the light was fading to a weak yellow glow. I switched to my backup light, but it did the same thing. That wasn't possible. But in caves, impossible things happen when you least expect them. The passage wound downward for maybe 200 feet before opening into a huge chamber. My weak light couldn't reach the far walls or ceiling. The beam just got swallowed up in the darkness. I'd been in big caves before, but this felt different. Like the darkness was thick enough to touch. That's when I heard the voice. Jerry, clear as day, echoing from somewhere ahead in the chamber. Jerry, down here. It was Bill Henderson's voice. I'd known Bill for 3 years. He'd helped on 2 other rescues, but something was wrong with how he sounded. No stress, no pain, no fear. Just calm and strange, like he was inviting me to dinner. Bill, I called back. Where are you? Are Rick and Dave with you? Down here, Jerry. Keep coming down. We found something amazing. I moved toward the voice, playing my dying light ahead of me. The chamber floor was smooth stone, worn by water. Easy walking, too easy. My boots should have echoed, but the sound seemed muffled, like the darkness was eating it up. How far down, Bill? I can barely see anything. 4. Just a little further. You have to see this, Jerry. We're all here. All here. That should have been good news. but the way he said it made my skin crawl. I'd done enough rescues to know what injured people sound like, what scared people sound like. Bill sounded like neither. He sounded wrong. I kept walking, following his voice. My light was getting weaker by the minute. Soon I'd be in total darkness. Then I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. 3 white helmets arranged in a perfect triangle on the cave floor. The boys' helmets. But no sign of the boys themselves. I bent down to examine them. The helmets were clean, no blood, no damage. But dark stains surrounded them on the rock floor. In the weak light, the stains looked black, but I knew what dried blood looked like. "Bill," I called again, "where are you?" The answer came from directly behind me. "Right here, Jerry." I spun around, my dying light sweeping the space behind me. Nothing. Empty cave. But I'd heard him clear as day, close enough to touch. "Bill, if you're hurt, I need to know where you are. I've got medical supplies, rope, everything we need to get you out." "We don't want to get out, Jerry." This time the voice came from above me. "Impossible. The ceiling was 40 feet up. It's better down here, quieter, safer." I played my light upward, but it barely penetrated 10 feet before fading to nothing. Something was moving up there in the darkness. Something pale that reflected my light for just a second before disappearing. That's when my light died completely. Total darkness in a cave is like being buried alive. Your mind starts playing tricks on you immediately. You hear things, see things that aren't there. But I'd been in dark caves before. I had my wheat light, a small backup that burned carbide for emergencies. I fumbled for it, with shaking hands, the familiar hiss and smell of carbide, then a small yellow flame that pushed back the darkness maybe 6 feet in every direction. Not much, but enough to move. "Jerry." Bill's voice again, but this time it was different. Layered, like 2 people talking at once. "Why don't you put out that light? It hurts our eyes." "Our eyes?" Bill said, "Our eyes." Something moved just at the edge of my light, white and tall and wrong. I turned toward it, but it was gone. Then movement to my left. To my right, all around me in the darkness, things were moving. "Who's with you, Bill?" I kept my voice steady, but my hands were shaking. "Rick and Dave?" "We're all here, Jerry, all of us who came down, and some others too, lots of others." The voice was closer now. Close enough that I should be able to see him. But there was nothing in my circle of light except smooth stone floor and those 3 bloody helmets. I started backing toward the passage I'd come from, keeping the light moving to cover as much ground as possible. But when I turned around, the passage was gone. Just solid rock wall where the entrance should have been. I was trapped in a chamber with things that sounded like people I knew but weren't people at all. That's when I heard Rick's voice from the darkness. "Jerry, remember that time you pulled me out of Miller's cave? When my rope got tangled and I was hanging upside down for 2 hours?" I remembered. Rick Morris. Hung up 30 feet down with a dislocated shoulder. I'd rappelled down and untangled him, then helped him climb out one-handed. Only Rick, myself, and maybe 2 other rangers knew about that rescue. It hadn't been in any official report. "How do you know about that?" I whispered. "Because I remember everything Rick remembers," the voice said. "Just like I remember everything Bill remembers, and Dave, and all the others who came down here over the years." Others. How many others? My carbide light flickered. Maybe 5 minutes of fuel left. After that, total darkness again. I had to move, had to find another way out. But every direction I turned, there was just solid rock wall. The chamber had no exits, except the one that was no longer there. "Don't be afraid, Jerry." Dave Carpenter's voice now, coming from directly above me again. "It doesn't hurt. You just go to sleep, and when you wake up, you understand everything. About the quiet places, about what lives in the deep caves where no light has ever reached." I looked up and saw them. 3 pale figures clinging to the cave ceiling like spiders. Too tall, too thin, with arms and legs that bent in ways human joints don't bend. Their skin was white as cavefish, and their eyes reflected my carbide flame like mirrors. They wore the boys' clothes, but the clothes hung wrong on their stretched-out frames. But worst of all, they had the boys' faces. Stretched and wrong, but recognizable. "What did you do to them?" I asked. The thing with Bill's face tilted its head at an impossible angle. "We didn't do anything to them, Jerry. We are them. We're just better now." adapted, evolved. Join us, said the Rick thing. The quiet is so peaceful down here. No noise, no pain, no worries about the surface world. Just the deep caves and the darkness and us. My light was fading fast, maybe 2 minutes left. I had to do something, anything. I remembered the emergency flares in my pack, road flares meant for marking accident sites on mountain highways. They'd burn bright and hot for 15 minutes. I pulled one out and struck it against the rough surface. Brilliant red light exploded through the chamber, 10 times brighter than my carbide flame. The 3 things on the ceiling shrieked, a sound like nails on chalkboard mixed with a mountain cat's scream. They scrambled away from the light, moving across the ceiling faster than anything human could move. And in the red glare, I saw the chamber's true size. It was enormous, with passages leading off in all directions. But more than that, I saw what lined the walls. Bones, thousands of bones, arranged in neat piles like cordwood. Some old and yellowed, some still white. Human bones. And skulls. Dozens of skulls staring down at me with empty eye sockets. At the far end of the chamber, barely visible in the flare light, I saw more of them. More pale, stretched-out things with human faces. Men, women, even what looked like children, all wrong and changed, and hanging from the walls like bats. They were all watching me with those mirror-bright eyes, and they were all smiling. The flare gave me light, but it also painted a target on my back. Every pale thing in that chamber was looking at me now, and I could see there were a lot more than just 3. At least 20 of them clinging to the walls and ceiling, all with faces I almost recognized. People who'd come into these caves over the years and never come back out. I had maybe 12 minutes of flare time, and then I'd be back in the dark with all of them. I had to move. The good news was I could finally see the passages leading out of the chamber. The bad news was there were 7 different tunnels, and I had no idea which one led back to the surface. The boy's flagging tape had disappeared. "You can't leave, Jerry." The Bill thing was speaking from somewhere behind me, but when I turned, I couldn't see it. The passages change down here. They go where we want them to go. That was impossible. Cave passages don't just change. But then again, 3 hours ago I would have said people couldn't cling to cave ceilings like spiders, either. I picked the largest passage and started moving fast. Behind me, I could hear them following. Not footsteps, something between scuttling and slithering. Like they moved on more than just 2 legs. The passage sloped upward, which gave me hope. Up meant toward the surface. But after a few hundred feet, it curved back down again, and the walls were getting tighter. I was being herded. "Jerry," Rick's voice now echoing from the walls around me. "Why are you running? We just want to talk. What happened to you?" I called back while I kept moving. "What changed you?" "We met our neighbors," Dave's voice answered. "The ones who've been living down here since before there were people on the surface. They taught us how to be quiet, how to listen to the mountain's heartbeat, how to live without the sun." The passage opened into another chamber, smaller than the first. My flare was burning down. Maybe 8 minutes left. I could see more bones here, but these were different. Arranged in patterns, like some kind of altar. And carved into the walls were symbols that hurt to look at. Not writing, exactly, but shapes that made my eyes water and my head pound. "The old ones were here first," Bill's voice came from the shadows. "Before Cherokee, before anyone, living in the deep places where the earth's bones show through. They tried to stay hidden, but people kept coming down, exploring, disturbing their quiet. So they started taking us," Rick added. "One by one, learning from us, becoming like us, but better." I found another passage and kept moving. This one was different, carved smooth, like the others, but with handholds cut into the walls. Made for climbing. Made for things with long arms and fingers. "How many?" I asked. "How many people have you taken?" "Not taken," Dave corrected. "Saved, changed, improved. There are so many of us now, Jerry. Families, communities, a whole civilization down here in the quiet places." My flare was half gone. 4 minutes, maybe 5. I had 2 more flares in my pack, but after that, I'd be defenseless. I needed to find the surface before then. The passage kept going up, twisting and turning like a snake, and the handholds were getting more frequent, like whatever used this tunnel regularly needed lots of places to grip. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Children's voices. singing. It was an old song, something my grandmother used to hum. But the voices were wrong. Too high, too clear, like glass breaking. And the words were different. Down, down, down to the quiet place, where the sun can't find your face, where the old ones wait and call, come and sleep beneath it all. I rounded a corner and found them. A dozen pale children, or things that had once been children, sitting in a circle in a wide spot in the passage. They couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old when they were changed. But now they looked ancient. Their eyes reflected my flare light like stars, and their smiles showed too many teeth. "Play with us, mister," one of them said in a voice like wind through dry leaves. "We've been waiting so long for someone new to play with." They started to stand up, and I saw their arms were too long, their fingers had too many joints, they moved like spiders, all angles and sudden motion. I backed away and found another passage, narrower but still going up. The children's laughter followed me, echoing off the walls like breaking glass. Behind that, I could hear the adults following. All of them, getting closer. 3 minutes of flare left. The passage suddenly opened into a huge vertical shaft. My light couldn't reach the top or bottom, just empty space stretching up and down forever. But carved into the walls were ledges and handholds, spiraling up like a staircase made for giants. This was it. The way up, it had to be. I started climbing, using the handholds cut into the rock. They were spaced for something taller than me, with longer arms, but I could manage. Behind me, I could hear them entering the shaft. The sounds they made climbing were like fingernails on stone. 2 minutes of flare left, and they were gaining on me. "Jerry." Bill's voice, much closer now, looked down. I made the mistake of looking. They were climbing up the walls like insects. Dozens of them, moving faster than anything human could move. Their pale skin seemed to glow in the red flare light, and their eyes were fixed on me with a hunger that made me sick to see. 1 minute of flare left. I climbed faster, my arms burning with the effort. The handholds were getting smaller, harder to grip. My boots slipped on the smooth stone, but I could see something above me now. A change in the darkness. Maybe natural light, maybe the surface. 30 seconds of flare left. The first one reached me just as the flare died. In the sudden darkness, something grabbed my ankle with fingers that felt like ice and wire. I kicked out and heard it shriek, then the sound of it falling back down the shaft. But there were more coming. I could hear them all around me in the dark. I fumbled for my second flare, struck it against the wall. Red light blazed up again, and I saw I was maybe 50 feet from the top of the shaft. From daylight, from escape. But between me and the surface were 3 of the pale things, climbing down from above, cutting off my escape route. "Nowhere to go now, Jerry," the bill thing said. It was hanging upside down from the wall above me like a bat. "Come down and join us. The quiet is so peaceful." I looked down, more of them climbing up from below, looked up, 3 more coming down from above. I was trapped in the middle of a vertical shaft with no way out. That's when I remembered the emergency charges in my pack. Cave rescue teams carry small explosive charges for emergency situations. Clearing rock falls, opening blocked passages. I had 4 charges, each about the size of a stick of dynamite, enough to bring down part of a cave roof if used right, or maybe enough to collapse part of a shaft wall and create a new way out. I pulled out one of the charges, set the timer for 10 seconds, and jammed it into a crack in the wall about 10 feet above me. "What are you doing?" The Rick thing was maybe 20 feet below me now, climbing fast. "Getting out," I said, and started climbing toward the charge as fast as I could. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. Rock rained down the shaft, and a chunk of the wall the size of a car peeled away and crashed into the depths below. 2 of the pale things fell with it, their screams echoing up from the darkness. But the explosion had done what I hoped. It opened a passage into another part of the cave system. A passage that led up, toward natural light. I swung across the gap and into the new opening just as the bill thing reached where I'd been. It shrieked in frustration and started across after me. I had 2 flares left and 3 explosive charges. And somewhere above me, I could see honest-to-God sunlight filtering down through cracks in the rock. I was going to make it to the surface. But I was starting to realize the surface was just the beginning of my problems. The new passage led up at a steep angle, more like a chimney than a tunnel. I could wedge my back against one wall and my feet against the other, working my way up toward that blessed daylight. Behind me, I could hear the pale things following, but they seemed to be having trouble in the narrow space. Their elongated limbs worked against them here. My second flare was burning down fast, maybe 3 minutes left, but the sunlight was getting stronger, and I could feel air moving against my face. Real air, not the dead stillness of the deep caves. "You're making a mistake, Jerry." Bill's voice echoed up from below, but it sounded different now, strained. Like the thing wearing his face was having trouble maintaining the illusion. "The surface world is ending. We've seen the signs. Down here is the only safe place left." "What signs?" I asked, still climbing. "Keep them talking. Keep them distracted. The bombs, Jerry. The missiles. The Cold War is getting hot, and when it does, the surface will burn. Only the deep places will survive." I thought about that. October 1964. The Cuban Missile Crisis was 2 years past, but tensions were still high. People built fallout shelters, worried about nuclear war. Maybe these things, whatever they were, had picked up on those fears. "You're lying," I said. "Are we?" Dave's voice now. "How do you know? When was the last time you heard news from the outside?" "Down here, we can feel the Earth's pain. We know what's coming." The flare died, but it didn't matter. Real sunlight was filtering down from above, beautiful and golden. I could see the end of the chimney maybe 30 feet up. Freedom. But as I got closer to the surface, I started to hear something that made my heart sink. Voices from above. Human voices, calling my name. "Jerry, Jerry Whitlock, can you hear us?" It was the backup team I'd called for before going into the cave. They'd finally arrived, but that meant I'd been underground for hours longer than it felt like. And it meant they were up there, exposed and vulnerable, with no idea what was down here. "I'm here," I called back. "I'm coming up, but listen to me. Don't come down. Whatever you do, don't come into the cave." "Jerry, is that you? We've got rope, medical supplies. Are you hurt?" The voice belonged to Sam Briggs, a local volunteer who'd helped on cave rescues before. Good man, experienced outdoorsman, but not prepared for what lived in these mountains. I reached the top of the chimney and found myself in a small chamber with an opening to the outside. Evening light slanted in through the cave mouth, and I'd never been so happy to see anything in my life. I crawled toward the opening, my muscles cramping from the long climb, but just as I reached the entrance, something grabbed my leg and yanked me back into the cave. The bill thing had made it up the chimney behind me. In the fading daylight, I could see how wrong it really was. The face was Bill's, but stretched and pale like old leather. Its body was too long, joints bent in directions that would break human bones. And its eyes, God, its eyes were like black mirrors that reflected everything and showed nothing. "You're not leaving, Jerry," it said in Bill's voice. "None of you are leaving." I tried to kick free, but its grip was like iron. Then I heard Sam's voice from outside, much closer. "Jerry, we can see the cave entrance. We're coming in." "No," I screamed. "Stay out. Don't come in here." But it was too late. I could see lights approaching the cave mouth. The rescue team was coming in, walking straight into a trap. The bill thing smiled with too many teeth. "Thank you for bringing them to us, Jerry. Fresh blood is always welcome in the quiet places." That's when I made the hardest decision of my life. I pulled out all 3 of my remaining explosive charges, twisted their timers together, and set them for 5 seconds. "What are you doing?" The thing's grip loosened in surprise. "Making sure none of you ever reach the surface," I said, and jammed the charges into a crack in the chamber roof right above the cave entrance. The thing let go of my leg and lunged for the charges, but it was too late. The explosion brought down half the mountain. The blast knocked me unconscious. When I woke up, I was buried under rocks in total darkness. My left arm was broken, my ribs felt like hamburger, and I could taste blood, but I was alive. And I could hear voices from above, muffled but human. Real human voices, not the things that lived in the deep caves. "Jerry, Jerry, can you hear us? We're digging you out." It took them 6 hours to clear the rocks and pull me out. Sam Briggs was crying when he saw me, tears of relief and worry. They'd watched the cave entrance collapse just as they reached it. They thought I was dead. The others, I croaked through a throat full of dust. "Bill, Rick, Dave. Did you find them?" Sam's face went dark. "Jerry, we found some remains deeper in the cave system, but..." He stopped, looking uncomfortable. It's hard to say what happened to them. The bones were scattered. Animals, maybe. Or the cave-in. I didn't correct him. How do you tell people that their friends were taken by something that wore their faces like masks? How do you explain pale things that lived in the deep places and hunted human prey? You don't. You write a report about a cave-in accident. You recommend the area be sealed off for public safety. You transfer to a different forest, somewhere flat, where the caves are shallow and well mapped. But you never stop listening for voices that sound like people you know, calling from the darkness. And you never stop checking the locks on your doors at night, because you know that some of them got out before the explosion. You know they're still down there in the deep places, waiting. And sometimes, on quiet nights, you hear them singing their children's song. Down, down, down to the quiet place. Where the sun can't find your face. Where the old ones wait and call. Come and sleep beneath it all. That was 40 years ago, and I'm an old man now. Retired from the Park Service in 1987, moved to Florida, where the ground is flat and the caves are shallow tourist attractions with gift shops and guided tours. Safe caves, normal caves. But I go back to West Virginia every October. Don't know why, exactly. Maybe to make sure the seals are still holding. Maybe to put flowers on the memorial they built for Bill, Rick, and Dave. The official story was a cave-in, and that's what's carved on their stone. Good enough for their families, better than the truth. The Devil's Backbone Trail is closed now, has been since 1965, when they sealed off all the known cave entrances with concrete and steel, posted warning signs every 100 yards. Of course, signs don't stop determined explorers, and every few years someone finds a way in that we missed. They never come back out. The missing persons reports always say the same thing. Experienced cavers, well-equipped, knew what they were doing. Just vanished without a trace in the sealed cave systems beneath Devil's Backbone Ridge. The local authorities blame it on unmapped passages and underground rivers. They bring in search teams, federal cave rescue experts, ground-penetrating radar. They never find anything. But I know what happened to those people. Same thing that happened to Bill and Rick and Dave. Same thing that almost happened to me. The pale things are still down there in the quiet places, growing their colony one victim at a time. Learning, adapting, becoming more like us while remaining fundamentally other. Last year, I was staying at the motel in town during my annual visit when I overheard a conversation at the diner. Two young men talking about spelunking equipment, cave maps, the challenge of exploring virgin cave systems beneath the mountains. They had that look I recognized, the confidence of people who think they know what they're dealing with. I bought them coffee and told them about unsafe conditions in the sealed caves. Rock falls, bad air, flooding. Made up stories about the last search team that got trapped and had to be helicoptered out. Basically lied through my teeth to scare them away from Devil's Backbone. It worked. They decided to try some caves down in Kentucky instead. Safer caves, tourist caves. I don't feel bad about lying to them. Some truths are too dangerous to share. The thing that haunts me isn't what I saw down there, or what I had to do to escape. It's what the Bill thing said about the surface world ending, about the deep places being the only safe haven. Because sometimes I wonder if it was lying, or if it knew something we didn't. The Cold War did end, but other wars started. Climate change, pandemic diseases, social collapse. Maybe those pale things in their quiet caves can sense things coming that we can't see. Maybe they're preparing for when the surface world finally burns itself out and the only survivors are the ones who learn to live in the deep, dark places. Sometimes I dream about going back down there. Not to fight them or try to destroy them, but to ask questions, to understand what they meant about being our neighbors, about being here first, about teaching us how to be quiet and live without the sun. In those dreams, they welcome me with voices of people I've known and lost. They show me their underground cities, their pale children who never knew sunlight, their libraries of knowledge carved into living rock. They offer me peace in the quiet places, away from all the noise and pain and fear of the surface world. And sometimes, in those dreams, I'm tempted to say yes. But then I wake up, and I remember that whatever they are, they're not us, not human. They wear our faces and speak with our voices, but underneath, there's something else. Something that sees humans as resources to be harvested, knowledge to be absorbed, genetic material to improve their stock. They're patient. They can wait. And every year, a few more people disappear in caves that are supposed to be sealed. Every year, their colony grows a little larger, their understanding of us becomes a little more complete. One day, maybe soon, they'll be ready to come to the surface. Not as pale things that hide from sunlight, but as perfect human mimics that can walk among us undetected. They'll have learned everything they need to know about being us, and when that day comes, we won't even know we're being replaced. Until you hear your neighbor's voice calling from the darkness, inviting you down to the quiet places where the sun can't find your face. And the voice sounds exactly right, exactly like someone you trust and care about. That's when you'll know they've finally come up from the deep caves beneath Devil's Backbone. That's when you'll understand it's too late. But don't worry. It doesn't hurt, they told me. You just go to sleep, and when you wake up, you understand everything about the quiet places and what lives there. You just won't be you anymore. My name is Jeremiah Whitlock, and I've been telling you the truth. Whether you believe it or not is up to you. Just remember what I said about the voices in the darkness, and maybe stay out of caves for a while. My name is Robert Millcreek, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a ranger at Pisgah National Forest for 13 years now, and in all that time, I never believed rocks could be anything but minerals and time. That was before Looking Glass Rock started singing. September of 1959 was perfect climbing weather in North Carolina. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the granite faces of Looking Glass Rock caught the morning sun like they were made of actual glass. That's how the rock got its name. That massive dome of granite, 400 feet of smooth stone rising up from the forest like God's own monument. I was teaching a climbing class that Tuesday morning. 6 park employees needed their technical climbing certification, and Looking Glass was the perfect place to learn. The rock face had natural roots, good handholds, and enough challenge to keep things interesting without being dangerous. At least, that's what I thought. The Cherokee used to call it the rock that speaks. Old stories said the mountain could sing, could tell you things if you knew how to listen. I'd heard those tales from some of the older folks in the area, but I put about as much stock in them as I did in fairy tales. I was a practical man, served in the war, studied geology before I took this job. Rocks were rocks, ancient, beautiful, but silent as the grave. That morning, I had my usual group of trainees. There was Jim Patterson from maintenance, a good man with steady hands. Sarah Chen, our newest naturalist, eager to learn everything about the forest. Mike Rodriguez from the fire service, strong as an ox but afraid of heights. The Hartwell twins, Danny and David, just hired on as seasonal workers. And Rebecca Walsh, a geology student doing her internship with us. We met at the base of Looking Glass Rock at 8 in the morning. The granite face rose above us, smooth and imposing. I'd climbed this route hundreds of times, knew every crack and ledge. The rock was solid, reliable. You could trust granite. It had been there for millions of years and would be there for millions more. All right, people, I said, checking my equipment one more time. Today, we're going to learn the basics of technical climbing. Looking Glass Rock is one of the safest climbs in the area. The granite is solid, the holds are good, and the routes are well established. Rebecca raised her hand. She was a smart kid, probably knew more about rock formations than I did. Ranger Millcreek, I've been reading about the acoustic properties of this formation. The Cherokee stories mention sound phenomena. Have you ever noticed anything unusual? I chuckled. Just echoes, Miss Walsh. These granite faces can play tricks with sound, make voices carry in strange ways. Nothing supernatural about it. But even as I said it, I felt a little uncomfortable. I had noticed things over the years, sounds that didn't quite make sense, echoes that came back different than they went out. Sometimes, when I was up on the rock face alone, I'd swear I could hear voices murmuring in the stone, but I'd always chalked it up to wind and imagination. We started with basic equipment checks: ropes, harnesses, helmets, carabiners. I showed them how to tie proper knots, how to belay, how to read the rock face for the safest route. The morning sun was warm on the granite, and everything felt normal and routine. The thing about granite, I explained as I demonstrated anchor points, is that it's incredibly stable. This formation has been here since the Precambrian era. It's not going anywhere, and it's not going to surprise you. That's when I heard the first note. It was low, almost below the range of hearing. A humming that seemed to come from inside the rock itself. I paused, listening. but the sound faded away. "Did anyone else hear that?" Sarah asked, looking around nervously. "Hear what?" Jim said. "Like singing?" I forced a laugh. "Just the wind through the trees. Sound can play tricks on you out here. That's why we always climb in groups and maintain constant communication." But my hands were shaking slightly as I checked my gear. In 13 years of climbing this rock, I'd never heard anything quite like that sound. It had felt almost like the granite was humming to itself, content and aware. The first part of the climb went smoothly. I led the group up the beginner route, a series of natural cracks and ledges that formed an almost staircase-like path up the lower face. The rock felt solid under my hands, warm from the sun, rough with good grip. Normal granite behavior. About 60 feet up, we stopped at a wide ledge to rest and practice belaying techniques. The view from here was spectacular. You could see for miles across the forest canopy, all the way to the distant Blue Ridge Mountains. "This is why I love this job," Danny Hartwell said, grinning as he looked out over the valley. "Beats working in a factory any day." His twin brother David nodded. "Still can't believe they pay us to be out here." I was showing Rebecca how to set up a proper belay when I heard it again. That low humming, but louder this time, and definitely coming from the rock beneath us. "There," Sarah said, gripping her rope tightly. "There it is again. You all heard it that time." We all had. 6 people don't hallucinate the same sound at the same time. Mike was looking around nervously, his face pale. "What kind of sound was that?" "Geological activity," I said quickly, though I wasn't convinced myself. "These old formations can settle, make noises, nothing to worry about." But the sound had felt different. Not like settling or shifting, more like singing. Like the rock was trying to communicate something. I was about to dismiss it again when Rebecca pressed her ear to the granite wall behind her. "Ranger Mill Creek," she said quietly. "You need to hear this." Against my better judgment, I put my ear to the rock face. And there it was, not just humming, but voices. Distant, muffled, but definitely human voices. And they were calling for help. The voices were coming from inside solid rock. I pulled my ear away from the granite face, my heart pounding. In 13 years of climbing, I'd never experienced anything like this. The rock felt different under my hands, warmer somehow, almost alive. "What did you hear?" Sarah asked, watching my face carefully. I didn't want to say it, saying it would make it real. Probably just echoes from other climbers somewhere else on the rock. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. These voices were coming from directly beneath us, from inside what should have been solid granite. And they sounded desperate. Rebecca pressed her ear to the rock again. "It's definitely voices, multiple people. They sound trapped." Mike was backing away from the wall, his climbing harness creaking. "I don't like this. I don't like this at all." "Everyone stay calm," I said, though my own voice was shaking. "There's got to be a logical explanation. Maybe there's a cave system behind the rock face. Sound can travel through limestone in strange ways." "This is granite," Rebecca pointed out. "Granite doesn't have caves." The humming started again, louder this time. And underneath it, we could all hear them now. Voices calling out, pleading. Some of them sounded like they'd been calling for a very long time. "Help us," came one voice, clear as day through the rock. "Please, someone help us." Jim had gone completely white. "That's not possible. Voices don't come from inside solid rock." But they did. And as we listened, more voices joined in. Men, women, children. All of them trapped somewhere inside, looking glass rock, crying out for rescue. "We need to get down from here," David said, his usual easy smile completely gone. Right now. I was inclined to agree, but as I looked down at our climbing route, something was wrong. The handholds we'd used to climb up, the natural cracks and ledges in the granite, they weren't there anymore. The rock face below us was completely smooth. "That's impossible," I whispered, staring down at blank granite where there should have been obvious climbing holds. "What's impossible?" Danny asked. I pointed down. "The route we used to get up here, it's gone." Everyone looked down, and the reality of our situation began to sink in. We were 60 feet up on a granite face, and the holds we'd used to climb up had simply vanished. The rock below us was smooth as glass. "Rocks don't change," Mike said desperately. "Rocks don't just change." But this one had. And as we watched, a new crack appeared in the granite beside us, a perfect handhold just where we'd need it to continue climbing up. It wants us to go higher, Rebecca whispered. The humming grew louder, and now I could make out individual words in the chorus of trapped voices. They were telling us to climb, to come join them, to become part of the rock forever. No, I said firmly, we're going down. There has to be another way. I pulled out my climbing gear and started setting up a rappel anchor. But when I tried to drive a piton into the granite, the metal simply bounced off. The rock had become harder than steel. Try there, Sarah suggested, pointing to a natural crack in the rock. But when I reached for it, the crack sealed itself, the granite flowing like water before hardening again. It's not going to let us down, Jim said, his voice barely a whisper. The voices from inside the rock were getting louder, more insistent. And now I could hear something else. Laughter. Cold, ancient laughter that seemed to come from the very heart of the mountain. What do you want? I shouted at the rock face. The humming stopped. For a moment there was complete silence. Then a voice answered, not from inside the rock, but from the rock itself. The granite was speaking. Climbers, it said, the voice like grinding stone. You climb on me, drive metal into my face, chip away my surface. For so long, I have been patient. But now I am hungry. Now I want companions. Rebecca was backing against the opposite wall of the ledge, her face white with terror. This isn't real. This can't be real. It's been taking climbers for years, the rock continued. They become part of me, their voices joining my song. And now you will join them. The ledge beneath us began to narrow. The granite was flowing inward like slow molasses, giving us less and less room to stand. Climb up, Mike said desperately. It's our only choice. No, I said. If we climb up, we're playing its game. There has to be another way. But as the ledge continued to shrink, and the voices of the trapped climbers grew louder, I realized we might not have a choice. The rock face above us now showed perfect handholds, an easy route to the top. Below us, there was nothing but smooth, impassable granite. Everyone stay together, I said, checking our gear. Whatever this thing is, whatever's happening here, we stick together. Danny was examining the new handholds above us. They look solid, real. They are real, the rock said, its voice reverberating through the granite. Climb up, Robert Millcreek. Bring your students. I have been waiting for you for a very long time. How do you know my name? I demanded. I know all their names, the rock replied. Every climber who has ever touched my face. Jim Patterson, Sarah Chen, Mike Rodriguez, Danny and David Hartwell, Rebecca Walsh. You are all in my memory now. Soon you will be part of my song forever. The ledge was now barely 3 feet wide. We had no choice but to start climbing up, following the handholds that the rock provided. But with each move upward, I felt like we were walking into a trap. The trapped voices grew louder as we climbed, as if we were getting closer to where they were imprisoned. And I began to recognize some of them. Climbers who had disappeared over the years. People who had simply vanished on Looking Glass Rock. Their bodies never found. Welcome, whispered a voice I recognized. Tom Bradley, who disappeared 3 years ago during a solo climb. Welcome to the rock's embrace. As we climbed higher, the granite beneath my hands felt alive, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. And I realized that Looking Glass Rock wasn't just taking climbers. It was collecting them, adding their voices to its ancient song. And now it wanted us. We were trapped 150 feet up on a living mountain. The handholds kept appearing just where we needed them, but I could feel the rock's patience wearing thin. Every time one of my people hesitated, the granite would shift slightly, making our positions less secure. It was herding us upward like sheep to slaughter. Keep moving, I called back to the group. Don't think about how high we are. Just focus on the next hold. But it was hard not to think about our height when the voices of the dead kept getting louder. They were everywhere now, in the rock beneath our hands, echoing from the granite face, whispering encouragement to climb higher. Mike was starting to panic. He'd always been afraid of heights, and now he was paralyzed about 30 feet below me, clinging to the rock face and shaking. I can't do this, he called up. I can't move. You have to, I shouted back. The rock won't let us go down. To prove my point, I looked back at our route. Once again, the handholds we'd used were gone, replaced by smooth granite. There was literally no way down except to fall. That's when the rock decided to make its point. The granite beneath Mike's feet simply opened up, not a crack or a ledge giving way. The solid stone just flowed apart like water, leaving him hanging by his hands with nothing but air beneath his feet. "Help me!" Mike screamed. I started rappelling down toward him, but the rock formed a barrier, granite flowing upward to block my path. It wanted to make an example of Mike, to show us what would happen if we didn't cooperate. "Please," Mike begged, his fingers slipping. "Please, I'll climb. I'll do whatever you want." The rock held him there for another few seconds, dangling over 100-foot drop. Then, slowly, it formed new footholds beneath him. Mike sobbed with relief as he found purchase again. "That's better," the mountain's voice rumbled. "Now climb." We kept going up, but the rock's demonstration had broken something in the group. Danny was crying as he climbed. Sarah was muttering prayers. Rebecca kept looking around desperately, as if she could find some scientific explanation for what was happening. "There has to be a way," she called out to me. "Granite doesn't behave like this. There has to be some kind of geological phenomenon we don't understand." But I was beginning to understand more than I wanted to. The Cherokee stories weren't just folklore. They were warnings. "The old stories," I called back to her. "The Cherokee called this place sacred. They said the rock could speak." "Stories aren't real," Rebecca insisted, but her voice was shaking. "Tell that to Tom Bradley," came a voice from the stone. It was definitely Tom. I'd known him for years before he disappeared. "Tell that to all of us." More voices joined in, a chorus of the missing. I recognized at least a dozen climbers who had vanished over the years. They were all here, somehow preserved in the granite, their consciousness trapped forever. "How many?" I asked the rock. 47. It replied with satisfaction. 47 climbers over the past century. Each one adds to my awareness, my memory. Soon I will have 53. We were almost to the top now. The summit of Looking Glass Rock was only about 50 feet above us, but I knew that reaching the top wouldn't save us. It would only put us exactly where the mountain wanted us. That's when Jim made his break for it. Instead of following the handholds upward, he suddenly swung sideways, trying to traverse across the rock face to a different part of the cliff. For a moment, I thought he might make it. The granite seemed surprised by his sudden change of direction. But then the rock face simply tilted. The entire side of the mountain shifted like a ship rolling in heavy seas. Jim lost his grip and fell. But instead of plummeting to the ground, he fell into the rock face. The granite opened up and swallowed him, like he was falling into thick mud. "Jim!" Sarah screamed. We could hear him inside the rock, his voice joining the chorus of the trapped. "It's dark in here," he called out. "So dark, and I can't move. Help me, please help me." "You see," the mountain said, "there is no escape, only acceptance." David was staring at the spot where Jim had disappeared. "This isn't real," he kept saying. "This isn't real." But his brother Danny grabbed his arm. "It is real. Don't fight it, David. If we fight it, we'll end up like Jim." "Smart boy," the rock acknowledged. "Climb to the top, all of you. It's time to join my collection." I was running out of options. We were too high to jump, couldn't go down, and going up meant walking into the creature's embrace. But maybe there was something at the top, some way to fight back or escape. "Everyone listen to me," I called out. "When we reach the top, stay together. Don't let it separate us." "What's your plan?" Sarah asked. I didn't have one. But I'd learned something important about this creature. It was old, patient, but it had weaknesses. It had let Jim almost escape before stopping him. It needed us to climb willingly. To some degree, that suggested it had limitations. "The Cherokee stories," I called to Rebecca. "Do you remember what they said about the rock?" "That it could sing," she called back. "That it could tell you things. But how did they deal with it? Why didn't it take them?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment, thinking as she climbed. "The stories said they gave it offerings, songs, ceremonies. They treated it with respect. It fed on their worship," I realized. "But we're not worshiping it, we're just climbing." "What difference does that make?" Mike asked. The difference, I was beginning to understand, was that the Cherokee had known what they were dealing with. They had established rules, boundaries. They had treated the mountain as a living thing that needed to be appeased, not conquered. But we had come here with metal spikes and ropes, ready to drive anchors into its face, to chip away pieces for better handholds. We had treated it like dead rock. "We need to change our approach," I called to the group. Stop thinking of this as a climb. Start thinking of it as a negotiation. Negotiation with what? Danny asked. With something that's been alive a lot longer than any of us. We reached a large ledge about 20 feet from the summit. Here the voices of the trapped were loudest. Dozens of them calling out from within the granite. I could see faces now, pressed against the inside of the rock like people trapped under ice. Welcome to my gallery, the mountain said proudly. Each face tells a story. Each voice adds to my song. You will make beautiful additions. That's when I noticed something important. All the faces in the rock were looking at one spot. A section of granite that was different from the rest. Darker, older, with strange markings carved into its surface. Cherokee symbols. Rebecca, I called softly. Look at those markings. Can you read them? She studied the carved symbols for a moment. It's old Cherokee script. Something about binding and sacrifice? The mountain's attention suddenly focused on her. Do not read those words, it commanded, its voice suddenly urgent. But Rebecca was already translating. It says, to bind the hungry stone, 3 must give freely what it seeks. Blood, breath, and memory willingly offered will seal the ancient appetite. The rock beneath us began to shake with rage. Silence. It's a binding spell, Rebecca called out excitedly. The Cherokee found a way to control it. That's when Looking Glass Rock decided it had heard enough. The granite face above us suddenly cracked open like a mouth, revealing a cavern filled with the preserved bodies of every climber it had taken over the past century. And it began pulling us in. The mountain's mouth opened wider, and I could see them all. 47 climbers preserved in crystalline granite, their eyes open, their mouths moving in eternal song. They were alive but trapped, conscious but helpless, adding their voices to the mountain's ancient harmony. Join us, Bobby, Tom Bradley called from his crystal prison. It doesn't hurt after a while. You just become part of something bigger. The suction was incredible. The rock was literally inhaling, drawing us toward its open maw. Sarah lost her grip and slid 10 feet before catching herself on a small outcropping. Danny and David were holding on to each other, both of them being pulled inexorably upward. The binding spell. I shouted to Rebecca over the wind, rushing into the mountain's throat. What did it say about 3 sacrifices? Blood, breath, and memory, she called back. Willingly offered. But how could we offer anything willingly when we were being sucked into a living mountain? I watched Mike lose his grip and slide toward the opening. At the last second, he managed to grab onto David's leg, but now all 3 of them were hanging by Danny's failing grip on a granite ledge. That's when I understood what the Cherokee had figured out centuries ago. This creature was ancient, powerful, but it was bound by certain rules. It could take climbers who came to conquer it, but it had to accept offerings made in the proper spirit. Everyone listen, I called out. We have to offer ourselves willingly. Are you insane? Sarah screamed back. Not ourselves, I clarified, fighting against the wind to pull out my knife. Parts of ourselves, blood, breath, and memory, freely given as the Cherokee did. I cut my palm and let the blood drip onto the granite. I offer my blood freely as payment for safe passage. The suction lessened slightly. The mountain was listening. Rebecca caught on immediately. She pressed her mouth to the rock face and exhaled deeply. I offer my breath freely as payment for safe passage. The wind died down more. 2 offerings accepted. But memory, how do you offer memory to a living mountain? Then I remembered what the creature had said about collecting voices, about adding climbers to its song. It didn't just want their bodies, it wanted their experiences, their knowledge, their memories of the climb. I offer my memory of this place, I called out, placing both hands flat on the granite. Every climb, every route, every season I've spent on this rock, I give it freely to you. And just like that, I could feel the memories flowing out of me. 13 years of climbing Looking Glass Rock, teaching others, exploring its faces, all of it streamed from my mind into the granite beneath my hands. The mountain's mouth began to close. The suction stopped completely. The bargain is made, the mountain's voice said, and for the first time it sounded satisfied rather than hungry. Blood, breath, and memory freely given. The ancient compact is renewed. The crystalline prison holding the 47 climbers began to crack. One by one, the trapped voices grew fainter as the mountain released its hold on them. They weren't returning to life, they'd been dead too long for that, but their consciousness was finally free to move on. "Thank you," Tom Bradley whispered as his spirit faded. "Thank you for remembering the old ways." The granite beneath us shifted, but this time it was creating a safe path down. Handholds and ledges appeared in a clear route to the bottom. And these felt different, permanent, respectful, like the mountain was offering us a gift rather than setting a trap. "Is it over?" Mike asked, hardly daring to believe it. "This part is," I said, "but we need to get down from here." Now, we climbed down in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The rock felt normal under our hands again, just granite, warm from the sun, solid and reliable. But I knew it was still alive, still watching. The binding spell had reminded it of its place in the ancient order, but it hadn't destroyed it. When we reached the bottom, I looked back up at Looking Glass Rock. In the afternoon light, it looked like any other granite dome. Beautiful, imposing, but seemingly lifeless. "What do we tell people?" Sarah asked. "Nothing," I said immediately. "Who would believe us?" Rebecca was studying the Cherokee markings carved into the base of the rock, symbols I'd walked past 1,000 times without really seeing them. The Cherokee knew. They had a relationship with it. Respect, offerings, boundaries, and when we stopped following their ways, it got hungry again. I realized, over the next few weeks, I researched everything I could find about Looking Glass Rock and Cherokee traditions. The old stories were all there, hidden in academic papers and local folklore. The mountain had always been alive, always been dangerous, but the Cherokee had known how to appease it, how to climb safely in exchange for proper offerings: blood, breath, and memory. The price of passage on a living mountain. We never told the official story. Our report said that Jim Patterson had suffered equipment failure and fallen to his death, a tragic but not uncommon climbing accident. His body was never found, which was also not unusual in the deep forests of North Carolina. But I knew the truth. Jim was gone, truly gone now. His spirit released with the others when we renewed the binding. The mountain had kept its part of the bargain. I still guide climbing groups on Looking Glass Rock. But now I follow the old protocols: a few drops of blood on the granite before we climb, a breath given to the mountain, a memory shared, usually something about why we love to climb, why we're drawn to these ancient stone faces. The rock accepts these offerings. Climbers stay safe. And sometimes, on quiet mornings, when the light hits the granite just right, I can hear the mountain humming contentedly to itself. Not the hungry song of a predator. The satisfied song of an ancient being that remembers its place in the world. 3 months have passed since the incident at Looking Glass Rock. Officially, Jim Patterson died in a climbing accident. The Forest Service investigation was brief and unremarkable. Equipment failure on a routine training exercise. These things happen in the mountains. I kept my job as head climbing instructor, but everything changed for me that day. I can't look at any rock face the same way anymore. When I run my hands over granite, I'm always listening for that faint humming. Always feeling for the subtle pulse that means the stone is more than just stone. The memories I gave to the mountain haven't returned. 13 years of climbing experience, gone. I have to relearn routes I once knew by heart, rediscover handholds I'd used hundreds of times. It's like trying to remember a dream that slips away the moment you wake up. But it was a fair trade. 6 lives for a lifetime of mountain memories. The Cherokee understood that some bargains are worth making. Rebecca transferred to a different Park Service position in Tennessee. She never talked about what happened, but I heard she wrote her thesis on Native American geological folklore. She's probably the only person who truly understands the theoretical framework of what we experienced. Sarah, Mike, and the Hartwell twins requested transfers to ground-based positions. None of them climb anymore. Sometimes I see them looking up at the mountain faces with a mixture of longing and fear, but they never ask to come back to the rock. I don't blame them. Some knowledge changes you. The hardest part is training new climbers. I still take groups up Looking Glass Rock, but now I tell them the Cherokee stories. I teach them the offering protocols. Most of them think it's just local color, a way to add mystique to the climb. But some understand. The ones who really listen to the rock, who feel the subtle awareness in the granite. I teach them the proper ways. Blood, breath, and memory. Respect for ancient things that were alive long before humans learned to stand upright. Looking Glass Rock has been quiet since that September day. No more disappearances. No more voices echoing from inside solid stone. The mountain is satisfied with our renewed compact, content to accept small offerings in exchange for safe passage. But I know it's still there, still watching. Sometimes when I'm alone on the rock face, I'll press my ear to the granite and listen to its slow, geological heartbeat. The mountain dreams of ice ages and continental drift, of the first Cherokee who learned to speak its language, of all the climbers who have touched its face over the centuries. And sometimes, very rarely, it dreams of the 47 voices it held for so long. They're at peace now, but their songs became part of the mountain's memory. In a way, they achieved a kind of immortality, not trapped, but preserved in living stone. I've started keeping a journal of the old Cherokee climbing protocols. Simple offerings, respectful approaches, ways to read the mountain's moods. If something happens to me, I want future climbers to know the rules. Because Looking Glass Rock isn't the only living mountain in these ranges. The Cherokee stories mention others, peaks and cliffs that require different offerings, different forms of respect. Stone beings that have slept for centuries but might wake if disturbed improperly. Last week, a geology professor from Duke University came to study the acoustic anomalies at Looking Glass Rock. She had equipment to measure sound resonance in granite, theories about mineral composition, and echo chambers. Very scientific, very rational. I tried to warn her about the proper protocols. She laughed and said she didn't believe in superstitious nonsense. She's been missing for 3 days now. Her research equipment was found at the base of the rock, apparently dropped from a great height. No body, no other trace. The official search will continue for another week, but I know they won't find anything. The mountain is patient, but it doesn't forget the old insults. Drive metal spikes into its face without permission, treat it like dead rock to be conquered rather than a living being to be respected, and it will remind you of your mistake. I've put together a new climbing group for next week, 6 people who want to learn technical mountaineering. I'll teach them knots and anchor points and how to read the rock face for the safest routes. But first, I'll teach them the Cherokee stories. I'll show them how to offer blood, breath, and memory to ancient stone. I'll help them understand that some mountains have been alive since the world was young, and they're still listening to everything we do. The professor's disappearance will be another tragic accident. Equipment failure, probably. A fall from the granite face, her body lost in the deep forest below. But sometimes, when the morning light hits Looking Glass Rock just right, I can see a faint outline pressed against the inside of the stone. The beginning of a new face in the mountain's gallery. The mountain is singing again, soft and low. A satisfied hum that echoes through the granite corridors where 47 voices once cried for help. Now there are 48. The Cherokee were right about one thing: the rock that speaks never forgets. It remembers every climber who has touched its face, every offering given or withheld, every moment of respect or disrespect. And it will keep singing its ancient song until the mountains themselves crumble into dust. I can hear it now, as I write these words in my cabin at the base of the forest. A low harmonic vibration that seems to come from the earth itself. Not threatening, not hungry, just aware, always aware.